3, 2, 1.
Greetings viewers, Zach here again with another one of our work building workshop videos here on Mondays. This is the show where I recap one of our world building Wednesdays streams on Twitch, which we do every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So if you want to have a bit of a word in on some of the worlds we build here, you can join us there, or you can join us at our Discord by giving us a bit of a coffee over on our Ko-fi page, which, speaking of which, thank you as always to our generous donators and supporters like TJ, KJ, Alec, and Rainweaver, as well as all the other donators and supporters on that page. Thanks to all of you, we can keep our podcasts going as well as shows like this. So, thank you. You know the drill. We use the pathway system from Cortex Prime to do all of our world building. So, that's how we do that. Through the series of nodes of locations, people, places, things, and situations, we kind of create a bit of a chart like this, which is a smaller one of our charts, but with a lengthy bit of plot hooks. I'll get more into that in a bit. It is one of the weirder ones that we have made, so this should be very interesting. Thanks again to Rainweaver over on our Discord for giving us the initial idea to kind of bounce off from and keep building from there. This one kind of started delving down into the realm of more plot divergent than actual world building, but the plot was so dependent on a unique world setting to fit, it kind of ended up developing a world in and of itself. So forgive the lack of world elements and more plot suggestions, as we're not here to tell DMs or storytellers how to do their stories, but again, the plot was so dependent on a unique world that there are lots of different directions and ways that you can play with this. So bear with us as we go through a very plot-heavy idea. Themes. We're going to start and dig down to themes. Now, realistically, this is a node that I would like to start adding into all of our world-building workshop streams, as theme is kind of where you can get a lot of really cool ideas, and if you're ever stumped on what to add to a world, always dig back to your theme. We've got two big themes for this one. One theme needs a little bit of explanation. A lot of the original idea stemmed from overcoming physical, psychological, social, and spiritual challenges. Well, not so much overcoming, but eventually evolving and accepting those as parts of yourself, and that being the more powerful option. But the game kind of lends itself to this development of wishing to overcome and learning to accept, and I kind of ended up really liking that as a theme partway through, so just figuring that we're going to get that out of the way now, that this is very much an intentional theme behind the world and the narrative that we came up with. Our second theme, and one that we actually started with, as opposed to kind of discovering it partway through, was the theme of identity, or your online identity, and the protection of that online information, because, that's not relevant at all for the current world we live in. Alright, now we're on to the actual elements of the world itself, and we're going to talk about the real world. Yes, there is a gameplay definition to the real world, or the RW as I'll often refer to it. The real world, much like the real world nowadays, is relatively unchanged from what you see nowadays, save for one major technological breakthrough that the game is predicated on. The Dream World, the Dream Matrix, the DM for short. Dream Masters? The DM is basically, if you think of it as like a shared MMO, like a big virtual space, a shared dream world that you visit like a video game, but you do so while you're sleeping. While your living body takes a rest, you can go and visit this shared MMO reality. In the real world, the Corp, which is just the name we kind of created with for the real world variant, as we spent a lot of our time talking about the Dream Matrix. We'll get to that later. The Corp ends up spending a lot of its daily routine actually assisting and pouring its funds into social initiatives. The players for this game are encouraged to create characters that have some kind of limitation that they feel like they need to overcome, whether it be physical, psychological, social. And we're not going to get into any specifics for this particular game as explanation, as that's a very deep conversation for the player and the GM to have. This is kind of a game world that's developed for very specific and safe table spaces to kind of explore and develop ideas that certain players might want to overcome through experience and friendship. As such, these social situations that the Corp help fund would be kind of like the Breakfast Club, a good way to get your players to come together, where they take an aptitude test. And this aptitude test is a part of the character development process that creates the skill set that these players are going to have when they go into the dream world, as is recommended by this Corp-based assistance program, if you will. As well, the real world will also act as like a Persona-esque social hub where players will actually have their entirely separate characters that exist in the real world that will be the place where they have to balance their lives and their relationships with their real world counterparts. Through the aptitude test, the players, or dreamers, as we'll start referring to them, will be given items and a bit of an extra special login process for the DM that will allow them special abilities while in the dream world, or the DM. As well, they'll also be given access to dungeons, special playable spaces, as we'll get to explain a little bit once we get to the DM section. Now we're in the DM section. The DM ends up looking a lot like the real world with a bunch of little changes, mostly cosmetic changes, as this is kind of a world where you can do whatever you want. That's kind of the point. That old sci-fi trope, if you will. In here, there is yet another social hub, mostly meant to be like the main login space where characters or players will, or dreamers, will meet, get together, and begin their adventuring party out from there. In the DM, this is known as the Hall of Fame, which actually takes place in the physical location of the museum from the real world, a local museum. We just kind of wanted to have that fun tie-in with, support your local museums. The main complication of the game are nightmares. Creatures that the players will actually be going out to fight. A la Persona, very Persona-esque. If you have played those games, you can kind of see where this is going. Now, nightmares tend to stay very specifically to dungeons and dungeon areas, which, as you're playing a bunch of characters or dreamers, you've been given access to, so your job is to go and take out as many nightmares as conceivably possible. Now, the players are encouraged to believe the nightmares to be nothing more than actual game constructs, and that the continuation, the evolving nature of what a nightmare is explored later on as the game progresses, as nightmares do often break out of dungeons and wreak havoc on civilians that are out in the main DM world. Now, these attacks are downplayed in the media by our corp, which the corp in the DM is referred to as the Inquisition. Not intimidating at all, I know, we're a little on the nose with this one. The Inquisition really plays down these attacks, and they are not quite widespread as they keep sending dreamers in to kind of manage the nightmare situation as it continues. Yes! Nightmares are going to get their own category because a good lot of our plot really circled around everything to do with nightmares. This got crazy in the discussion. Let's start with the basics. Nightmares are players or dreamers that spent way too long and or got addicted to staying in the DM. They stayed in it for so long that it became either very difficult or near impossible to return to their physical body, either through just neglect or some form of, not wanting to go back. As such, while they are still physically alive, they cannot revert back to their physical bodies. Nightmares, when they first begin to physically deteriorate and become incapable of returning to their forms, actually start out as very feral creatures, which kind of lends to the whole, they're just monsters and enemies in the game sort of thing. But the longer that a nightmare exists, the more self-aware and sentient it becomes. They begin to start taking on names that are prevalent of their past lives. So, the Prophet, or the Therapist, or whatever creepy name you can kind of think of to juxtapose what's going on. There's even a discussion for a bit there about having nightmare factions, one in particular being more or less a set of pacifists, just individuals who have gained sentience, know their nightmares, and kind of just want to live life and keep it that way, not really induct more into their group, but also kind of be ambivalent at the same time. This is up to you if you want to keep or utilize this part of the story. The other faction was the Awakened, a group of nightmares that have acquired sentience, but believe that this world to be the true afterlife, or at least the true state of being, the free world where you can do whatever you want. They actively seek out and kill dreamers and civilians so that they can become nightmares. Nightmares, when they become powerful enough, if they kill a player, a dreamer, or a civilian, they can actually possess the real world body of that player. Normally, death doesn't have that big of an impact on a player or a dreamer. They will just revert back to the Hall of Fame and lose whatever items and XP they were earning at the time. But if a nightmare, a powerful nightmare, kills them, they are at risk of becoming a nightmare themselves and losing their physical form to the possession that the nightmare that killed them will provide. The King Nightmare is the last one we're going to talk on, and it is the longest living nightmare that is currently in the DM. Some of the story elements we were really playing with is the idea is that the King Nightmare is actually one of the OG game developers for the DM. They ended up getting addicted to the whole technology and staying in it, but also learning that maybe, just maybe, they were on the verge of understanding how to utilize the technology to create digital versions of his consciousness, basically download his brain into the machine and live forever, if you will. Obviously, there is some degree of accuracy to what he's saying, with nightmares being able to possess other people. He's sentient enough to actually be a part of this world without his living body being in existence, period. And you could have him manipulate the players into believing that he is truly a construct of the game world and not actually a nightmare at all. However you wish to narratively play that out, a lot of fun you can have with this. As this is kind of what the King Nightmare is all about, the whole transferring of consciousness, it explains why this is what the Inquisition is researching. They actually will go out in the real world and find the bodies of recently created nightmares and collect them and place them into an institution known as the Asylum. It is through here that they are researching this very thing that the King Nightmare's OG creator is actually looking for, which is basically eternal life and living inside of the machine. So, fun stuff. Dreamers. As I mentioned, these are our players, and the Inquisition are using the Dreamers to kind of help mitigate the nightmare population, as if they continue to get out and wreak havoc, they can uncontrollably convert all the players into more nightmares, and that's just going to look bad at some point. So Dreamers are utilized to go in and kind of keep the nightmare populations, or at least keep them physically away from the rest of the players, under the guise of it just being a video game. As such, it is often Dreamers that are most in connection with Nightmares. So, most of the time, Nightmares are converted Dreamers. Again, another thing that a DM could play with if they wanted to. One of the main facets of the game that was talked about is during the aptitude test that players take in the real world, they would be provided an item in the DM. This item we refer to as a totem, an item that bestows them a gift that can relate or be in complete opposition to whatever ailment affects the player in the real world. Again, not super specific as to what that could be in association. This is a very personal conversation between the player and the DM. Some of the items we were playing with is like an old shoe that is some kind of a speed boost, a stone that is a kind of a resilience boost, a mask that ends up being like a stealth boost, or even a deception boost, depending on how you want to play that. Another aspect to the Dreamers that was really talked about was the idea of converting their player abilities from the DM and transitioning them into the real world. Now, there's two ways that we primarily played this. Either keeping it completely separate until the end game, where you can explain some reasoning as to why the end game can't finish off inside the DM, and that way those powers transition for the end game to occur in the real world. Yes, Neo, I'm looking at you. The other idea that we were playing with is one that's more progressive and more gradual, as you can start transferring skills, kind of like Assassin's Creed style, transferring skills from your game character over into your real-world character. The gameplay options, we kind of already went through most of those. Gameplay options were like the items we were already mentioning, which work really well for the Cortex Prime game system, but there are ways that a clever DM could convert that to pretty much any game system that is relevant to what you're looking for. Most of the discussion was leading to like small little plot details that a DM can use to kind of make things easier. Like maybe there's an underground tunnel system in the DM that allows players to, at the 9th hour, actually find a secret shortcut that leads to the final boss or the final dungeon. Or interesting dungeon designs that were being discussed, like a 13th Ghosts style dungeon. That would be cool as hell, like a big glass house with shifting walls. Dope! And that's it! Yeah! That's pretty straightforward, to be totally honest. I mean, it was fun, one of the smallest charts we've ever made, but it was a very in-depth and very deep conversation, which I highly encourage. If you've got the time, 3 p.m. on Mountain Standard Time on Wednesdays, visit us over on Twitch and jump on into the conversation, because that was awesome. I mean, this was pretty straightforward for naming. I'm going to call it the Dream Matrix. Yeah? Sometimes these things write themselves. Thank you all for watching this world building workshops. Our first Ko-fi subscriber exclusive show pops up this Thursday. It is a Cortex Prime game, so if you are interested in figuring out how Cortex Prime works, our Session 0 and our Session 1 will both be airing this Thursday. And next Thursday is our second Ko-fi subscriber exclusive show, and these are both for all subscriber levels. You can subscribe to any amount, and you have access to all of this stuff. But our second subscriber show is called A Chronicle of Talomere, which is a audiobook-style retelling of a game that some of us play off-camera. In the meantime, please feel free to comment below to let us know what kind of topics or nodes or suggestions of things you want us to focus on when building worlds. Like, are there things that we're leaving out that you want to see more of? Are themes more of an interest to you? Are characters more of an interest to you? Let us know down below. Subscribe, like, thumbs up, all that stuff that's usual. Tell your friends, you know. And visit our website to find out what more stuff we've got going on, like our other podcasts and, streams on Twitch, which we stream on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays from 3 to 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So, without any further ado, thank you all very much for joining me on this lovely Monday, and as always, enjoy the world.